ultimate Republican nominee, Donald Trump was the only person to raise his hand to say that he would not swear to that. So, I mean, this man has no loyalty. Loyalty, we'd like to think, hopefully, but loyalty should work both ways. You know, you're loyal to a person and they are loyal to you. It's very difficult to have loyalty to someone who is not loyal to you. You see this repeatedly with Donald Trump. Michael Cohen is a good example of that, but there are many, many more. And you know, I've always been loyal to all the candidates that I've worked for. I don't write tell-all books about people that I've worked for and any of the above, and I will continue to be loyal, but I would expect the same from Donald Trump to the Republican Party, which is absent.
Philippe, I think people would say you've been loyal to the Clintons. You've worked with them for a very long time. Is it your sense that the notion of political loyalty has changed over these last 2 years?
I don't think so, unless it's someone you shouldn't be loyal to. You know, you're right. I have been loyal, and I'm proud of that. But it's been based on seeing how Secretary Clinton, Senator Clinton, all the different variations, does her job. And if you have to ask someone to be loyal to you, there's something wrong there. Hillary Clinton has never said, you know, I want you to cut your finger and shed some blood for me.
We're breaking news here.
She hasn't had to, because I believe in what she has stood for and what she's been trying to do. I've been, you know, honored to be part of it. That, and it's been, loyalty is also when things are bad. It's easy to be loyal when things are good. If Donald Trump's got to walk around asking the FBI director and Republican senators and Rick Tyler and Never Trumpers on to be loyal, I think you ought to take a look in the mirror and realize it's not just Republicans that are, he's not loyal to anyone. I mean, he's going to dime out one of his kids when it comes down to, you know, his sentencing.
Leah, you watched that campaign back in 2015, 2016, and there are many bizarre moments, but one of them was at these rallies where Donald Trump would ask members of the audience to raise their hands and swear an oath to supporting him in the election. It is something it seems like he fixates on in particular.
Well, that's because that's how he's run his entire career and his life, right? He runs things like basically like he's a mafia don. So, you know, we talk about, okay, maybe there's not a blood oath that you have to take, but there is, you know, a question of, will you be loyal to me? And are you willing to go to the lengths that are necessary to be loyal to me, to be loyal to my enterprise, to be loyal to, you know, this, the power dynamic that's going on here. So we saw that very clearly with Michael Cohen and with his testimony in front of Congress. We've seen that in terms of, you know, his former employees who have gone to the dark side, right, who have turned on him. Somebody like Omarosa, who explicitly says, you know, loyalty is the driver of everything in his universe. So, you know, we've had presidents before who have been petty. We have had presidents who have asked for loyalty in different circumstances, but we haven't had a level of this that is rapidly approaching cult-like status in terms of, you know, demands for loyalty and how you run the entire enterprise.
Rick Tyler, what explains the fealty in this case? I started off by talking about this vote that we're going to see in the Senate this week, the degree to which the White House is watching Republican members of the Senate, threatening those who are coming up for re-election here in the next cycle. What explains their willingness to pledge loyalty to a person versus the party?
Weakness. Look, people think of Republican or any politicians or members of Congress, and there are a few, but there are actually very few. We call them leaders. They're not leaders, they're followers. They will move wherever their districts tell them to move, and that's the way the founders designed it. And what they're afraid of is that Donald Trump will pick a fight with them, particularly in districts that have a high approval of Donald Trump, and Donald Trump will turn against them, and he will make it very difficult for them to win. And that has been the case in a lot of congressional districts and some Senate seats around the country where Donald Trump's endorsement means, you know, win or lose for the candidate.
I'll ask you lastly, Rick, where this leaves you as somebody who is loyal to a party, as a party goes through all of these undulations, as a party becomes so closely associated with a person. How do you see yourself vis-a-vis the party now and looking ahead? I'm just struck by so many Republicans who come on and criticize the president, criticize the way things are, and yet I wonder what happens next, what your hope is for what happens next.
Well, look, first of all, David, I was honored to be blackballed by the Trump White House. You'd think they have better things to do, but that's one thing they did. But look, leaders emerge in crisis, and Donald Trump is not a leader. Leaders engender loyalty. Donald Trump has to demand it because he's not leader. He doesn't know how to engender loyalty. And the next leaders emerge as well. We don't always predict who they are. You could see that with Ronald Reagan. You could see that with Barack Obama. Leaders just, they emerge. And so I don't know who the next leader will be, but that's what it'll be. And there'll be a opposition party to the Democratic Party, and it won't be the Republican Party, because the Republican Party sold its soul to a personality and not a set of principles.
It's another aspect to this, which is that while Trump is threatening Republicans, the Republican leadership, both in the form of House Minority Leader McCarthy and Senate Majority Leader McConnell, are releasing their members to vote against Donald Trump for political purposes. So he's threatening them. McConnell is giving them the high sign to do what you need to do, because what's the difference? It's going to go down, it's going to pass. And someone's not talking to someone there, but they all know that Donald Trump can steal their seat.
Rick Tyler, thank you very much. Appreciate you joining us this morning. Rick Tyler joining us from Washington, D.C.
This too shall pass.
There you go. There you go. On that note, up ahead.
You've reached a threshold of evidence that justifies that very grave action by the Congress.
Impeachment is premature at this moment.
Impeachment is a divisive issue in our country.
Glenn Kirshner, I want to start with you and just get your perspective on this. We've talked a lot about all of the legal goings on here. When you move that into the Capitol, when the conversation turns to obstruction of justice as lawmakers see it, do you understand the calculus that Democrats are wrestling with at this point?
I think we all understand the calculus. I think it's let's wait for the Mueller report, because that's going to give us everything we need and then some, many people believe. I think we should be going on a dual track. I think the president has committed, high crimes and misdemeanors at an alarming rate. I mean, there are too many to catalog, but when you talk about, we've got now emoluments, we've got him telling Comey to lay off Flynn and then firing Comey. We've got him inviting the Russians into the Oval Office and celebrating the firing of Comey because the pressure's off. We don't have to worry about the nut job anymore. You've got him now, we see in recent days, granting security clearances to the unsecure, if not the insecure, his own kids.
Could be both. It's not binary, to steal a word from, steal a phrase from Sean Spicer.
And it goes on and on and on. One of the most alarming that I think has gotten buried, and I'm not quite sure how, is that Andy McCabe said that on one occasion during an Oval Office briefing, when they were discussing the threat that North Korea posed to us by way of their ballistic missiles program, Trump said, I spoke to Putin about it. All is good. We're safe. No threat from North Korea. How is that not sort of siding with an adversary over your own intelligence community? I mean, it's a high crimes and misdemeanors jamboree at this point. There's so much, and I think we're doing a disservice to the American people by not saying, we will not tolerate it. We're not going to wait for somebody else to announce the results of their findings in order to help do our dirty work. This is dirty work that must be done because the House needs to be cleaned.
Jill, I saw you nodding a bit. I have a question just about the degree to which Nancy Pelosi, the House Speaker, can patiently stand by as these conversations continue on the periphery. I think there's a lot of agreement that investigations-wise, there's coordination. Those are proceeding apace. How long can it continue with these conversations on the sidelines before it begins to distract from that?
I think not much longer.
Yeah.
I think the way that Pelosi is playing this, I mean, it makes sense. I think she's trying to wait out the Mueller report. I think she's trying to get a sense of what the American people are pushing for, what Congress people are pushing for. But at some point, she's going to have to lead on this. And I think we're rapidly approaching that point. I think most even sort of casual observers of the Trump administration can see from his tweets alone that he's actively trying to obstruct justice. I think it's very difficult to not look at the totality of what this administration has done, what he has done, and not conclude that there is at least potentially some very serious wrongdoing. And I think assuming that Mueller is kind of the great white savior that's going to come and tell us the entire story of Donald Trump, I think is putting sort of not too much faith in him, but is really a much more expansive view of what his investigation is actually about than the kind of constraints within which he's operating, which is why the House really needs to lead on this and use their fact-finding power and their investigative power to tell the full story of what this president has done, what this administration has done, and figure out whether he has committed high crimes and misdemeanors and whether he has really compromised this office and the American people.
Philippe, somebody who has led on this is Maxine Waters, the chairwoman of the House Financial Services Committee. I'll read one of her most recent tweets here. Obstruction of justice reality show, to Glenn's point. Firing Comey, sending coded messages to Manafort and others that he has the power to pardon. Lying about Trump Tower meeting. Threatening Cohen's in-laws. Attempting to destroy Mueller. What more do we need to know? Impeachment is the only answer. She's somebody who's been in Congress a long while. She's in a position of power, as I say, leading the Financial Services Committee. Could Representative, could you see this moving to a vote? Are Democrats averse to having that vote? How risky is that at this point?
Well, that's the fear. I mean, I think Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton are looking down at us saying, what the hell are you people waiting for? Like, what did you think we put it in the Constitution for? Exactly. And, you know, there's an issue. It's taken, at least to this point, because the Republicans held both sides of Congress, and they've been complicit in covering up for Donald Trump. At this point, you know, I think we're somewhere between. I agree with Glenn about the dual track. I think the reality is 6 months ago, was this ripe? No. Is this ripe for tomorrow? Maybe. But the truth of the matter is we're going to be having this conversation in 6 months because the Democratic leadership, not only in the form of Speaker Pelosi, but probably Chuck Schumer on the Senate side, is going to say, we don't have the votes. What's the point? And look at what happened in '98. It went bad for the Republicans. And I think the problem with both of those is, first of all, you don't know you don't have the votes. I know that sounds naive, but Donald Trump occasionally really antagonizes the Republicans in the Senate. And second of all, I just don't agree with the notion that '98 backfired on the Republicans. I mean, how did that happen? Yeah. They held Congress in 1998 on both sides. George Bush went on to win for 2 terms. They held Congress until 2006. And then fast forward 20 years, we're having a conversation about you can't use impeachment because it's been politicized. So they've really, I think, done a great job of neutering the one thing we have. And now you're looking at Donald Trump saying he might not respect a defeat in 2020, he might not accept it. Impeachment might be the only thing we have to deal with this situation. It shouldn't be such a, 4-letter word.
All right. Coming up here, clearance insecurity, according to it. Now, real quickly, I just want to thank Philippe Reines for bringing in a contribution to our buffet this morning.
I thought we would up our game, and we've had 6 months of donut holes piling up.
Right.
The problem is that there are 50, and we each had to eat 10.
That's good. Well, I'll take another.
We're behind our pace.
We'll get there by the end of the show. All right, the first family has a problem with security clearances. It's dog Jared Kushner from day one, and now there is new scrutiny on his wife and the president's daughter, Ivanka Trump. Key Senate Democrats just called on the National Intelligence Director to provide them with more information. This after a troubling report last week that President Trump overruled advisors and career officials who recommended against a high-level clearance for Kushner. Now, someone inside the White House has leaked a detailed timeline of how the clearances were approved and who made the final call to Congress. The White House insists the president has the authority to make the final call on clearances, but there are 2 big issues here. One being the lies and contradictions about what the president did or didn't do, and 2, Jared Kushner's troubling track record. The Daily Beast reports the president's son-in-law left U.S. Embassy staffers in the dark when he met with the Saudi Crown Prince in Riyadh last week. Jared Kushner also famously omitted more than 100 foreign contacts in applying for his clearance. Key among them his meetings with Russia's then ambassador and another meeting with the head of a multi-billion-dollar state-run Russian bank. According to Time, that latter meeting is emerging as a key moment in what Democrats allege was a much larger Russian effort to exert influence over Trump's inner circle as the president-elect's team prepared to take office in late 2016. Leah, let's start with this piece in Axios. And what's astonishing here is we've seen all of the leaks to journalists. This is a leak to Congress. The House Oversight Committee saying, we asked for these officially. The White House came back, said, we're not going to give you these documents. And then lo and behold, they've actually had the documents now for about a month's time.
Yeah. So this is a leaking White House. We've seen a pretty steady stream of leaks. We've seen a pretty steady stream of people who are willing, not to go on record, but to anonymously kind of give insight into what's going on. And I think part of this comes out of a real concern for the way that the White House is being run. So on the one hand, you have somebody who is coming into office who has absolutely no understanding of how government works and who has spent his entire life in the private realm, but also who has no care, who has a complete disregard for how government works or how public service works. So we're dealing with that. On the other hand, we're also dealing with someone who has run his entire business and his entire, his private kind of goals as a criminal enterprise. So with the complete disregard for democracy, for rule of law, for ethics. And so this is what's coming out. This is what these reports are exposing. And I think in part, what we're saying is that, this is an organization that essentially is saying the rules don't apply to us, and that there are people within the White House who are deeply concerned about that and who are ready to blow the whistle.
Glenn, you talked about this just a moment ago, the degree to which this is an issue for you as you look at all of this that we've seen over these last 2 years, why is it so important to you? Why is it such a pivotal point, knowing what happened here with regard to these security clearances?
You know, security clearances really matter. And they shouldn't be given out like party gifts once somebody takes a position at the White House, particularly somebody that the intelligence community or people that the intelligence community has decided are unworthy of security clearances. When I was in the Army, the Department of Defense did my background check for security clearance purposes. As a federal prosecutor, the FBI did it. And let me tell you, literally, they went back as far as my second grade school teacher to find out, I mean, there are two important principles at work when we conduct security clearance investigations. One, they want to make sure, the government wants to make sure you are who you say you are. You didn't create a fictitious backstory, and that's why they go, well, did you have Glenn as a student in second grade? Yes, I did. Check that box. The other is that, not that we believe all these people are evil or are going to sell out our country, but we need to know what the pressure points are on these people. For example, did somebody take a multi-million-dollar loan from an overseas bank that is of dubious, legality? Or we need to know who out in the real world can put pressure on people who are now inside the government doing the public's work, because they might not intend to be compromised, they might not intend to sell out the government, but you know what? If somebody can pressure you, you may start to think, is it really going to matter that much if I give this confidential federal report out to a foreign bank, a foreign agency, a foreign entity? So, I mean, these things really matter with respect to who we entrust to do the public's work.
Talking about pressure points, an acupuncturist would have his or her hands full, Joe, when you look at Ivanka, you look at Jared Kushner in particular. I mean, the list of things that are worrisome, and again, we don't know the specifics about what held up the clearance or what gave people pause, but that list can lead one to infer that there was a lot at play here.
Yeah, I think we can make some educated guesses about what held up their clearances. And the president does have the power to, sort of go above the heads of the folks whose job it is to make these determinations. But if the president actually believes that this was a fair decision, then he needs to be transparent about it. If there's nothing to be ashamed of or worried about, then why not tell the American people, here's why this was the decision that was made around Jared's clearance, or around Ivanka's clearance. I think what's obvious with Trump is, what we discussed earlier. He prizes loyalty above all else in kind of this Mafia Don way. That isn't about telling the truth. It isn't about positioning him to even do a good job. It's certainly not about competence. It's not about protecting the American people or the American public. It is solely about consolidating power in one man, which is why he surrounds himself with family members, with these kind of lackeys that are just going to do his bidding. What we're seeing now is the sort of terrible and broad downsides of that, which is that he puts people that are not only completely unqualified into these positions of power, but also potentially deeply compromise American security. And I am hoping, like Glenn, that this is the story that is a major linchpin in really shifting perhaps impeachment proceedings, but what happens with this administration.
All right, when we come back here, first it was big banks, now Elizabeth.
Amazon.
Too big.
Google.
Too big.
Facebook.
Too big.
Mark Zuckerberg.
Too powerful. And that's really the point of the too bigs. It's they've got too much power.
On the beat with Ari Melber, Senator Elizabeth Warren detailing her new plan to take on some of the world's largest technology companies. According to the senior senator from Massachusetts who is running for the Democratic nomination for president, they dominate markets, chew up competitors, and drive the consumer experience. She told Ari, we've got to change that. Senator Warren wants regulators to undo some mergers, and she wants new restrictions on some of the biggest platforms. Glenn, let me turn to you first. There has been the focus in this campaign thus far. Amy Klobuchar is down South by Southwest today. She's going to be talking about antitrust on technology. It's going to be an issue as this goes on from a privacy perspective, from a size perspective, from a health of democracy perspective. What can be done at this point? Elizabeth Warren talking about revisiting that merger, the acquisition of Instagram, Facebook's acquisition of Instagram. Is the horse out of the barn? Is that stuff pie in the sky? Can she actually do anything about how these companies have gotten so big?
Probably not. It seems like it would be a battle royale, and I watched that interview last night with Elizabeth Warren, and, frankly, I think part of us wants to cheer along with that because there really is no mom and pop marketplace anymore. And I think that is to the detriment of of the people of our country. There are these behemoths now that seem to control everything, and some of what we hear coming out of, I don't want to single out Facebook, it's scary about what they collect about us and then how they can exploit it, even if they're not trying to exploit it in a nefarious way. It's still exploitation. What can be done? I got to tell you, I'm hopeful that something can be done, because it seems like we are on this dangerous tech track, and I applaud Elizabeth Warren for what she's trying to take on.
Leah, do you as well? I mean, this is a lengthy policy proposal based on a Yale Law Review article. In terms of what we've seen from candidates, it's a specific policy proposal, and of all of them thus far, it seems like Senator Warren has kind of been ahead in doing that.
So sure, and I think the point is not necessarily whether or not she can do this, but, you know, is she putting out big ideas? Because at this point, you know, you got to put out the big ideas.
Put it out there. Yeah.
And the idea of at least regulating, or at least having some oversight to these tech giants, is actually an idea that is incredibly popular amongst the American people, right? We saw this in terms of the hearings around Facebook. We saw this in terms of the reports that have been released about Russian hacking or Russian influence across these across organizations. We know this about data collection, and we actually see that it's popular not just on the left, but also on the right. Right. And so I think part of what she's trying to do is put these big ideas out here and say, look, I actually want to tackle this. I want to take this on. Now, granted, this might not actually work and might not come to pass, but I am addressing an issue that I see out there in the public, and I'm going to do it in concrete ways. I'm going to give you an agenda. I'm going to give you a plan.
Philippe, the gap between Silicon Valley and Washington is large geographically, and it has been in terms of just understanding as well over these last many years. Are we seeing that narrow somewhat? Do you see politicians more willing to reckon with what's happening in Silicon Valley in light of the fact that you have people out there who profess to know a thing or two about democracy, and as we've seen over these last few years, that's far from the case?
Well, Silicon Valley's been trying their patience for several years, and I think you have to bifurcate these groups. You have Amazon. I'm not exactly sure why Senator Warren is upset that they bought Whole Foods. I like Amazon as is. Please don't change it. Google, I understand that it's a behemoth, but I'm not sure what the argument there is either. I know they bought Nest and they bought something else. Facebook is its own problem. Facebook has abused the power that she is pointing out, that Mark Zuckerberg has vested in himself. And I think the problem is they don't know what they are. They, at some points, try to live up to a standard of being a media company, but then they screw that up. Sometimes they try to end up just a social connection, and they screw that up. Now he's saying that they are a privacy. People are just secret, people giving their things. I think the problem with Facebook is they've lost control of their own platform, and they need to be regulated no different than, say, a cable carrier or telecommunications company.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Thank you all for joining me. Leah Wright-Rigueur, Glenn Kirshner, Jill Filipovich, and Philippe Ryan is here in New York. A reminder, reset